Our next session will focus on agreements which are slightly different, but they are still agreements. Concession agreement between the airports and handlers, and catering agreement between airlines and caterers. With that, please let me invite on stage, I was worried that you are not here, Fabio Gamba, Director General, Airport Service Associations ASA and Airline Catering Association. And Thomas Romek, Vice President, Safety, Security and Operation, ACR, Airport Council International. Welcome back, Thomas. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for participating in this panel. The ASA and ACI have updated and published this year the template, agreement template for concession agreement, if I am translating it correctly. It was originally issued a while ago by ACI, by airports. Thomas, what was the reason for the update, and what was the benefit to do it together with ASA?
It's a good question. And so the original document which we produced actually follows on from a policy paper which ACI produced in 2016, where we, as one of the pillars of the policy which we produced, was to have, or to try and ensure that there would be agreements between airport operators and ground handling service providers. And these agreements formalize the relationship between the two organizations on an airport site. So in order to facilitate that, ACI, one of our technical groups, the Technical Safety Standing Committee, developed a first template which I was involved in directly as chairman of that group before joining ACI. But I do have to say it was not a very balanced document. And so Fabio and I, when I joined the organization, started discussing, and we actually put together a small working group with a couple of people from the airport side and a couple of people from the ground handling side, and basically looked at how we could create a more balanced approach to the relationship that we were trying to structure within this document, and really try and find, let's say, views which are shared between the airport operators and the ground handling service providers to ensure that in the end both parties can use the agreement, whether it's an airport going to a ground handling service provider to set up that agreement, or the other way around, GHSP coming to the airport to set up the agreement. So it's really been to try and find a much more comprehensive, much more balanced approach with the ground handlers. And I think it's been a pretty successful document. In the end, we published it in in January this year, and it's actually been picked up by a number of airports already in its current form. It's a template, just like you were talking about for the SGHA, a template which can be edited, can be modified, can be adapted as need be, and it is really helping in terms of the creating this relationship or recreating relationships when need be.
Thank you very much. I think that we can confirm with Fabio that we are happy that you had a say into it, because I remember the first version we were debating a while ago. Fabio, what was the biggest change in this revision, which was important for you as a handler? I know that there was edited some airport responsibility and a lot of items, but what from handler point of view was the biggest value for you from amendments, which you think was like kind of crucial get it in?
Well, first, bonsoir Paris. I wanted to say that. And back to what Thomas said, I won't go into the details because I don't think this is really the point of the discussion now. But what I would say is we've realized that it was an excellent initiative. I think that was called upon because obviously the relationship between airports and ground handlers is something that people take as being for granted. And as a matter of fact, you obviously have, in most of the cases, already quite complicated, licenses and working arrangements. So for a lot of people, this is not something that was necessary. At the same time, you have to realize that it's not always the case. There are a number of airports still today, currently, that do not have an operating or a contract vis-à-vis their ground handlers and vice versa. Even though that's, I would say, a minority. But perhaps most importantly, even in the major cases where you already have something in place, it's always good to know that there is a reference or a guidance somewhere that you can check upon in case you have a number of questions with respect to this or that clause, no matter what. And the fact that it has been, and obviously, I guess this sounds very familiar to everyone here, but the very fact that you have something that has been signed upon by the two trade bodies saying, this is not the standard, we're not talking about a standard here, this is a template document that both trade bodies have agreed upon, is providing this reference that I'm talking about. So you can glance at it and say, oh, well, this is interesting, this is what they have both agreed upon. And it's never something that will accommodate 100% the views of the airports or the views of the ground handlers, but it's something that both industries know has been agreed upon, and so they can get inspired from.
So the industry balance is the key, if I understand from both of you in the contract. Maybe just stepping back, I would like to ask, do you think, and it's maybe for you, Thomas, do you think that airports should actually control GSP in terms of operation and training and other aspects and provide requirements? Isn't it the role of the airlines or who contract handling services? Should be maybe airport only the facilitator and infrastructure provided? Or where do you see your role in it as an airport?
I like the question. There's a very long answer which I could give, but I'll try and keep it within within a couple of minutes. But I mean, airports, airlines, ground handling service providers, we live in almost a tripartite symbiotic environment, and we have to work collaboratively to be able to make the aviation system work, to provide services to passengers, to transport cargo, to do what we do best as an industry. And so yes, you do have agreements which have been historically established between airlines and, let's say, aircraft operators, because we're not just talking about airlines here, we're also talking about business jets, business aviation, which is a big segment of activity on some airports. So you have these types of agreements which have been traditionally established, but the airport also has, as part of its certification process, under the state CAA, it has a responsibility to ensure safety of operations on the airport. It has a mandate to have a safety management system in place, and as part of that safety management system, it has to monitor the safety performance of all of the different stakeholders on the airport. And this is where it starts getting a little bit more complicated for a airport to conduct those monitoring activities and to have the direct relationship and have the tie-in between the safety activities of the ground handling service provider and of the airports. If you don't have some type of agreement, if you don't have some type of relationship which is established, so that agreement can be an informal type of, we know each other, so we work well together, and that can work fine. It can be an MOU written on 2 pages of paper. It can be something as extensive as what we've produced here, which is a 25-page template, again, which can be modified and changed as need be. But creating those relationships is important because it formalizes the way that the airports and the ground handler work together. On an airport, there's a lot of activities which ground handlers do, which are not under the responsibility directly of the airline or the aircraft carrier. You have things like driver rules or airport bylaws and these types of very specific regulations or rules on the airport side, which are of the responsibility of the airport. and need to be monitored and need to be, in some cases, enforced, to maintain a fluid operation, to maintain a safe operation on the airport. So that relationship, again, is important, and these are parts of the elements which we've put into the agreement. There's other areas, for example, baggage handling. So in the baggage makeup areas, the BHS is one of these typically complex areas where you've got a lot of activities and a lot of pressure in terms of time, and you need to have some form of, again, monitoring of activities, safety within those environments where the airlines are not necessarily directly related or directly involved. And so this is what we've been trying to look at through this agreement. And there's a whole series of other things, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. It makes sense from the perspective you are looking at that. But a question to Fabio. Where do you see the relationship to the SGHA between this contract and SGHA? Do you see it's an addition or contradiction? I totally agree with everything that Thomas said. Where do you see because now you are with two contracts, right? You always been probably in most places, but...
Yeah, I mean, as ground handlers, we're used to be sandwiched, right?
It hasn't changed. Huh?
we are the meat in the sandwich. Yep. The thing is, I want to make this absolutely straight, because I think that's a question that some people are asking themselves. There is obviously no encroachments of one over the other or vice versa. Obviously, the SGHA is proposing a template reading of a working relationship between two stakeholders, the airlines and the ground handlers, and this one, we should find a catchy acronym, actually, because SGHA is one thing, but how do we call our own?
The agreement template.
The template agreement, or the agreement template, whatever, is then formalizing, is then proposing a reading of the airport's ground handling working relationship, and that's it. And so it's just formalizing or proposing a reading of a reality. Obviously, in the template agreements with ACI, we're acknowledging of the existence of other template agreements, such as the SGHA, which I'm not sure is the case of the SGHA. Perhaps it should be, vice versa, something.
There's a proposal time, huh?
Valid for a thought,
Still
exactly.
on 2023 revision.
Exactly, but certainly
give you a clue.
we do acknowledge of the existence of the SGHA, and we're complementing, right? And so it's providing the second leg of this tripod that I think we've referenced throughout the day-to-day of the working relationship.
Well, that's where you were involved, right? Not to get squeezed more, but have it work out for you as well. I will ask both of you. In the original version, there was some SLA on between the airports and handlers. I know that you amended it. Does it create additional pressure for the handlers if you have an airline SLA and that's the performance you are measured against? Airport wants to have SLA as well for airport's performance, so seems there's a pressure. It's a question for you, question for handlers and for you, why you want to have a SLA, or how did you approach it here, that we are not adding additional pressure, because we talk about the pressure today, yesterday a lot.
So in the adapted document, or the new version of the document, we took out all the figures in the SLA, so we just left it as purely a template without any specific KPIs or specific measurable elements, because that was one of the things which I think was not quite useful in the previous document. It was a bit too prescriptive, and so we got rid of that, and we just left it again as kind of an open-ended approach. Now, from an airport's perspective, having an SLA with your ground handlers makes sense, because for one, you want to ensure that you have consistent approach to the services which are provided to the passengers across the airport. If you operate in an airport with 50 plus or 60 plus airlines, you get variations of service level agreements which are established between those airlines and the ground handling service providers. And then you get standards or you get variations in terms of the delivery of service to passengers who sometimes will travel with one or multiple airlines at your airport. And so having some form of harmonization makes sense. It also makes sense from an operational performance perspective within the airport, and ensuring that you have elements that you can measure within that relationship, again, with the ground handling service provider, can also drive towards better operational performance and ensuring, in the end, best use of resource, best use of capacity across the airport. So I think there's some good arguments as to why it's there. There is a risk that there's maybe a disconnect between what's established between airline A, B, C, and the ground handler, and then the airport. And part of the approach to take with that is to have a discussion within the community around the KPIs, around the elements which are put into the SLA. But of course, that's something which is dealt with on a case-by-case basis, airport by airport, in each of the agreements which are set up.
Thank you. Fabio, so do you see pressure? Don't you see pressure? Do you see it as a...
No, but, I mean, on this one, I'll be short, because if you get me going on the SLA, then it risks taking a few hours. But I'd simply say, again, what we've adopted as an approach with ACI was a pragmatic one, to say, okay, well, there are SLAs in place between airports and ground handlers. That's a fact, that's a reality. We're not reinventing the wheel here. We want to be as neutral as possible. We want to offer the possibility for existing working relationships to be able to use that as a template, in case they don't have it and they want to have it. Or in case they already have it and they want to have a different model. But it's sort of neutral, is agnostic in the approach. Perhaps a little bit unlike the SGHA. We've really kept the let's say the shell.
Yeah, the framework.
And the framework. And it's up to the stakeholders, the protagonists, to then really fill it up the way they feel. If they feel there is a need for one, and we know that in many cases there's no SLA between an airport and a ground handler, unlike in most cases for airlines and ground handlers. So yeah, I think pragmatic approach, and I think a good one eventually.
Thank you. I have a question for both of you. Do you have any implementation plan or enrollment between your members, between ASA and ACI members, how to promote it, or?
So we've done a few, let's say, communication activities around this this new agreement. We had a joint webinar which we ran a couple of months ago now. Time flies. Just to promote it, we of course speak about it in various events, this type of event, although probably less airports here than ground handlers, but there isn't really, at least from my perspective, a plan for rolling out. What I have seen, though, is that there's been some interesting uptake from airports, and in some regions where there's a bit of a challenge already, or where there aren't traditionally agreements established, we've actually had requests to translate the document into other languages and so on. So it's a rolling process, I'd say. But
yeah, well, we're considering making it mandatory for our members. Oh, I'm joking. No. No, I think again, the approach was the one to say, let's provide a template. And we'll see with the future, of course, we've made communication out of this. We'll see in the future whether this is being used. I think my sense is that we will never really know, because obviously the document is out there, it's for free. Everyone can use it the way they feel it. So I guess you will have a lot of downloads. Whether this will then translate into concrete actions, a copy and paste in full or in part of the document, we'll probably never know. And that's fine. That's the reason why it was made, just to provide guidance. So if this is being used, and obviously we'll have, I guess, some questionnaires or surveys being sent, probably in the near future, because it's too early to say. If we realize that, I don't know, 25% of our members are using it in full or in parts, that's a success. That's great. Let's continue. If we realize only 1% do that, okay, still, it's there. And as is the case for the SGHA, as we've heard before, this is a working document. It's not cast in stone, and we're happy and certainly ready to review it from time to time and adapt it according to the needs and to the changing times.
I personally think that it's a very good document, and I think that airlines can appreciate it, that it's balanced now. Especially we have some regions and our members are worried the way how the concession contracts are done and how the tenders are done and what the requirements are. And that sometimes the price prevail the operational needs and others. So any kind of step to the standardization and assurance the safety, I think it's great on airport and handle level. So my personally kudos to you that you did it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, let's move to the other contract. I'm not going to spend too much time. Fabio and I, we spent past 2 years on it. There was or there still is, so it's not valid anymore, in-flight service catering agreement, which has been published 10 years ago, part of the Passenger Standard Conference at IATA. And it hasn't been updated since, right? So we kind of came conclusion, most like independently, but at the same time that it was just time to update it on airline side. And the time Fabio reached to us and say, let's do it together, caterers and IATA together. Catering Association. So Fabio, to you, it pretty much, I have to give a credit to caterers because you pretty much came with the plan what you would like to change in a catering agreement. So I would like to ask, why you see necessary to update the catering agreement, and what were the kind of points you liked, you wanted to, because you came with these principles which you would like to update. So and you pretty much drive the changes. So.
Well, thanks for the question, and perhaps I need to say that I'm talking with my ACA hat and not with my ASA hat. Otherwise, people might be confused. And the ACA hat is the one that talks on behalf of the onboard catering companies. And it's indeed true that I think one of the reasons why ACA was originally created was precisely to suggest a review of the CICA documents, which is actually not 10-year-old. It used to be 12-year-old. When it was done in 2010. And
right.
And the thing is, a little bit like the imbalance that Thomas referred to when talking about the first draft of the template agreements. I think the feeling amongst onboard catering companies was that it was great that there was such a document in existence, but it was a shame that this document was not being used more because, and that was our perspective, obviously, it was a bit imbalanced on a number of points. Which ones? Well, there was obviously a number of them. But we can go through the list, but I would just say probably nominated products and the way who was responsible for the nominated products was one of them. Termination of the contracts, which we felt was a little bit too unnatural, and especially after the COVID, we saw that it was good that we discussed that. Liability clause, there was no such liability, and that was a major concern to us in the sense that, when that's the case, and I don't want to come back on the discussion that was held before on the liability in Article 8 clause. It's not in Article 8 in the CICA, but we have sort of a mirroring clause on liability. That was good because we realized that in the end, when you don't have any liability clause, the only one that are taking advantage of that fact are the lawyers in the end. It's neither the airlines nor the onboard catering companies, because eventually you have additional costs and you're having regular, or how should I say that? You're venturing into uncharted territory, and that's never good. You never know really how things are going to unfold. So these were major aspects, adjustments as well, were major aspects of the reasons why we thought, hey, why don't we discuss with our friends over IATA and try and make this document a balanced one that then the airlines and the onboard catering companies feel compelled and convinced to use in full or in part. Again,
Well, I have to agree with you that the liability was amended significantly, right, with some limits and anything. And it amazes me that we were able to agree on that, because that's a difficult one, and we did it in fairly short time. So that was for me, it was impressive for the team working on it. So would you say that we have a balanced contract now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Honestly, I think this is, and kudos to the team of IATA as well. But I really do believe that, and that's the way I sold it to the ACA members, by the way. I really said, this is, I think, the best that we could get. It's really balanced. You know, it's consensus. It's a consensus-driven piece of paper, and I think it will work, and it will provide the necessary assistance and, you know, backgrounds that both need. So I'm really selling it like really pushing for it to the ACA membership, and I think we will see that in the near future it will really take off.
Yeah, that was my question. If you think it's going to be used, so you already answered it. And I agree with you. The negotiations were extremely hard. Huh? If you go back, it was extremely hard, but it was give and take. And I think that the open mind on both sides was incredible. So I think we have to really give a kudos to the team. Huh?
But you are the specialist, Eva. You obviously are following the SGHA, and you followed SICA. Hard, yes, but I think they were fair, and we were all cognizant of the fact that, I mean, we can only try and understand the other parties and where they're coming from if we want this to be a success. And I think that's what we did. Same for our own agreements.
Absolutely.
So I have a closing question for you, gentlemen. At our previous discussion or session, our panelists agreed that the templates or agreements should be standardized as much as possible. I know we create them as a templates for modification. So what is the value to the industry templates with modification or not? Where do you see, because we created the industry template, right, for catering, for concession. So what is the value of industry templates? Where do you see it?
Well, I'd say that the value is really providing that base for having the discussion and for working on an agreement. I mean, we, as at least ACI, we don't develop standards. We only develop recommended practices or guidance material for our members. We're not a standard-making body, and we don't intend to be. And so it's really just making available the best, let's say, knowledge, the best practices we can for our members to have a good document to be able to work on. And I think that's where the value is, really.
Thank you. Fabio?
No, nothing to add. I think that's exactly this, and I think that's ultimately the work of a trade body and association to try and provide guidance. These are not standards. They might become standards eventually, but that's another question. It's really to provide, something that if you are a corporate company working with another corporate company, you cannot do, because obviously it's only on a one-on-one basis. And here we're really trying to provide the view with all the consensus that you can imagine, the view of two industries together, and possibly in the future we may talk of a tripartite standard agreement. No, why not? Let's discuss that. But certainly that's I think the ultimate core objective of a trade body, or one of it at least.
So thank you very much, gentlemen. I just one more question. Where is this concession agreement available? Is it on your website for your members, or that's where it's published?
Absolutely. Yep.
It is published, yes, and available.
So website. Catering agreement is accessible to your members, caterers member. Otherwise, is available in IGHM850 for anyone else. And with that, I would really like to thank you for participation and giving us an insight on the new industry templates which are up there.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.